ParshaCast.com presents.
It's January 5th, 2017, the 8th of Tevet, 5777. The Parsha is VaYigash. Our special guest is UMBC Hillel's Rabbi Jeremy Fierstien, and this is the ParshaCast. Rabbiim, Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to the 10th episode of the ParshaCast. Each week on the ParshaCast, I explore the Parsha with a special guest. You can find past episodes of the show at ParshaCast.com. This is the first week that I am producing a full video of the ParshaCast in addition to the podcast. If you like what you see, please consider becoming a ParshaCast patron. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Just go to ParshaCast.com for information. On to this week's guest. Jeremy Fierstien is the campus rabbi and executive director for University of Maryland, Baltimore County's Hillel. He and I sat down earlier today over Skype to talk about VaYigash and the UMBC Jewish community. Jeremy, thank you for joining me on the ParshaCast to talk about VaYigash.
Thank you, Eitan, for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So, as I said in the introduction, you are this new executive. You have this new executive director, campus rabbi position, and it's at University of Maryland of Baltimore County. And so, something I said to you when we were just talking a few minutes ago, I don't think that most of the people listening to this who live outside of Maryland even know that UMBC exists. And I'm wondering if you could tell the folks listening a little bit about the makeup of the Jewish community you're working with on what is in many ways a very local campus here in Maryland.
Happily. And I'll start by saying UMBC, first of all, Go Retrievers. That's our mascot. And it's been named one of the top 50 up-and-coming universities in the country. So whether you know about it now or not, you'll hear about it very soon, I'm sure. We have a very dynamic president whose one of his main goals is to create diverse community on campus. And we were known originally as a commuter school, which will speak to the nature of the community on some level for the first part of this description. But we're moving towards a residential campus in a very wonderful way. They're building dorms and things along the way. And the goal of community partners such as Hillel is to create residential programming on weekends and outside of classroom times for students to be able to grow in the community experience of college. The Jewish community at University of Maryland, Baltimore County is very interesting. We estimate 1,000 or so Jewish students in the undergraduate. Yeah, it's a good size undergraduate programs, and then the graduate programs, I think there's somewhere between 500 and 800. That's a little more amorphous to me at the moment. So good sized community to draw on. What's really amazing is the diversity of the community, and I think that speaks to the diversity of the Jewish community in Baltimore. I was shocked to find the amount of Mizrahi Jews that are on our campus and that are involved in Hillel and in many different campus experiences.
For people listening, just one sec. For people listening, it's good to know that what the Jews that most North American Jews will call Sephardic, a lot of them are more properly called Mizrahi. So Sephardic Jews are Jews whose families at some point or another, the communities they come from came through Spain at some point. Mizrahi Jews are Jews from non-European countries who remained in their countries for many years. They never traveled through Spain. They didn't have that Spanish influence. So a good example of Mizrahi would be Iranian Jews, or Mizrahi Jews, for example. And you're about to mention a component from another country of Mizrahi Jews.
And we do have a strong Iranian population here as well. Baltimore is one of the big Persian Jewish communities in the United States. But the one that I'm finding most fascinating at the moment is also because I have not really experienced them on this level before, is the Azerbaijani Jewish community. We have a handful of students who are from the Azerbaijani community and are very proud of their identity. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is to educate the rest of the Jewish community on campus and in Baltimore about their culture and the world that they're coming from, because I think that it's a little known piece of Jewish peoplehood that should be highlighted, especially now that we're moving in the 21st century to a more diverse understanding of Jewish community, Jewish people, Jewish peoplehood. And it's really lovely to be able to highlight some things like that. The other interesting segment of community to note is we have a very large population of Ner Israel, which is the fairly centrist to right-wing Orthodox yeshiva and learning institution housed in Baltimore, men only, who come and take many evening classes. Some of them are in class during the day. And while Hillel, I'm not convinced Hillel is the focal point of their Jewish community on campus, I am trying to connect and find inroads to help service their campus and college experience. And we've been able to create a twice-a-week mincha where I see a lot of those faces and get to know those folks. And it's a really interesting segment of the community that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be taking, the college experience seriously on that level. So that's been really exciting to find as well. And we have a very strong liberal population that's very diverse, ranging from all the mainstream movements represented on our leadership team. We have a volunteer and an intern leadership team at Hillel. We have people in all the mainstream movements, in addition to two specifically identified Orthodox students who are there to engage the Orthodox community in more ritual and practice ways. So really great place to work. I'm super stoked to see where this can go.
That's fantastic. And of course, best of luck in this position moving forward.
Thank you.
So we're here to talk about VaYigash. So what did you bring this week that you found interesting or fascinating about this week's Parsha?
So before we even get into the minutia, if you will, of the Parsha itself and the specificity of a couple of things that I really like about the language and such, it's a favorite portion of Torah for me because this is one of the integral points of narrative shift from the tribal / familial history of Genesis, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes, to the national identity or the peoplehood identity of Judaism and the Jewish people. If Jacob didn't come down to Egypt, I always wonder how would the story be different if Jacob didn't go down, or if Jacob had accompanied Benjamin down, and what that might mean for the concept of peoplehood. Because would he have gone down and taken Joseph back initially? How could the narrative have played out differently? Has always played in my mind. And what I love about this is we're getting to the end of Genesis and we're about to pick up with Moses. And there's that wonderful chiastic structure in Exodus, which I don't get into now because we're not focusing on that. But this is basically, to me, the shift from tribal and familial identity and living in the comfort zone to moving to a foreign land and really becoming the unique national peoplehood identity of the Jewish experience. I think this is that moment.
Do you see this shift as something that's like a binary switch? We go from the tribal group to the national group, or do you see it as happening over time? So for example, when I've been asked, or I've even taught, here's the moment where we become a nation, I often point to either the Exodus or Sinai, or really from the moment we leave Egypt through the revelation at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai. But I actually add a third step too. So I have the family, like you're talking about. I see the Egypt period through part of the desert as the tribal period, and then the national, and then we become a nation. Who knows when, under David, under that's another way to look at it. So when you say there's that switch, are you looking at it again as a binary thing, or as something that we're moving from from Act 1 to Act 2, and Act 2 is us becoming a nation?
I don't see it quite as a binary. I agree with your assessment of a progression. I think my progression is slightly different, nuanced in a way.
Well, that's not allowed.
Well, I'll just leave then. I'll go hang out with Beit Shammai and we'll be all good. Since we got our Hanukkah, he's in my head on some level. I think that for me, I understand your distinction. I'll challenge your distinction a little bit in saying David is the state. David is the political. David is the kind of physical geographic concept of nation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm moving more. That's why I use peoplehood and national identity somewhat interchangeably at the moment. It's honestly, it's like the classic Zionism 101 debate, right? Is it political? Is it national?
Yeah.
Where's the middle point?
Mm-hmm.
So I see this as the national peoplehood concept, which again is still a progression, because even through the wilderness experience, and certainly through the progression of the 5 books and the narrative in the Torah, leading through the prophets and the Nevi'im and the writings as well, there's always that tension between the familial tribal and the national peoplehood piece. Yep. And I think that's kind of the beauty of the what's the word, the fabric, or the weaving of the fabric of our tradition. That you can have both, not necessarily contradictory, but certainly separate and mm-hmm. different concepts of yourself and your identity woven together in such meaningful ways. And that's the beauty of it, I think. And it's a really nice parallel to working at university. You've grown up your whole life under the roof of your parents, right? And you leave your comfort zone and you move into this really diverse world where you have to start defining yourself in relation to other people, right? It's like Egypt. I'm not in Canaan anymore. I'm not in Kansas anymore. I now am Jeremy, the Jew, living in UMBC as opposed to South Jersey. And you have to then kind of recreate the world around you from your perspective. And I work for a pluralistic organization. I believe I'm a practitioner of pluralism personally and professionally. So to me, that's the moment. That moment of working in the university is the moment where we need to bring in both the different threads of the fabric that weave together our tradition and make sure that your identity and my identity are solid and concrete in ourselves to be able to interact meaningfully and respectfully with the world around us without losing any part of ourselves. And I think that's what's going on when Jacob and the family go down to Egypt to meet Joseph, become part of the fabric of that society as well, mm-hmm. without losing themselves. And at the end of the Exodus experience, we learn that there's 3 things, right? There were 3 key concepts or practices that the Jewish people kept in Egypt that supposedly brought them back out of slavery: Jewish names, the language, and I can never remember the third. I think it's Taharat Mishpacha, at least from my upbringing, but I'm not sure that's the right one.
That one would be
I'm terrible with 3.
If it is the third one, then that one's definitely midrash. The other 2 you could find some sources in the text, but the third one, that if it's something like that would be in the midrash world. But back to our parsha itself, right? So this parsha is getting that process started. This is the beginning of that process. What did you want to focus on then? You said you had something in the text in particular that you thought you were going to focus on.
So there's 2 things. Just one is for fun. I fancy myself an amateur linguist. And I love when the Torah doubles up language. So when Judah approaches Joseph and he says Tarof Toraf, that he was torn from, like, you could translate it as torn from limb by limb. Mm-hmm. It's to emphasize the moment and the emotion that comes through that. I'm always intrigued by, and he's talking to the person who he believes was torn limb from limb on some level. And I love that. It's not like it's breaking the fourth wall, but it almost feels like it is, right? It's bringing us into a story in a way that I think is it just adds real depth to it for me to be playing with that.
Where is that? So where is that?
So that would be verse 28 in chapter 44. So Mem Daled Pasuk Chafchet. And should I read the pasuk in Hebrew? Or?
Go for it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Vayetze Echad Meiti Va'omar Ach Tarof Toraf Lori Tav Adhena. Mm-hmm. And it's just that wonderful. Like I said, I think the emphasis is so fun in the way the authors of the Torah decided to put forth. And I love the word treif. I'm a big fan of food, and kashrus is a big thing, obviously, in our Jewish life, the concept of ethical eating and what it means to abide by dietary restrictions and dietary laws. And the concept treif, as the Yiddish, is torn. And I love, what that means for food and how we approach it.
So something that I'm noticing in the verse you chose here, So again, it's verse 28 towards the beginning of the parsha. This is in the midst of the of Yehuda arguing with Yosef about keeping Binyamin, about keeping Benjamin in Egypt, and he's quoting his father. So he's saying, "Here's what our father said to us," and I think what's interesting here in what Yaakov says. First of all, I think you're right about the poetic language. It's beautiful language there. Yaakov doesn't say, as Judah's quoting him, he's not saying, "You told me he was torn to pieces," which is actually the story that happened. He's saying, this one left me is possibly a translation. This one went away, and I said, Yaakov is saying about himself, I said, "Oi, he has surely been torn to pieces," and I have not seen him. So when Yehuda is talking with Yosef here, he completely leaves out the brother's role in their father's pain, while using this beautiful language at the same time. So I think that's interesting also.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it shows the disconnect, both in Yehuda's brain and also between the family members, which I find very interesting. And again, if he only knew at the moment that he was talking to Joseph, what would that mean?
I wonder, saying you said disconnect, over the past year when it comes to politics, but also in all sorts of other studies, we humans are really good at convincing ourselves that something happened differently from the way it actually happened. Like, we're really good at editing our own memories. It's been years, it's been decades since this happened. Yeah. I wonder if by this point, the narrative in Yehuda's mind does not involve the brothers anymore. If the narrative is simply... we found this and brought it to our father, and he's actually convinced himself that that's what happened. If he doesn't even think about their role in it anymore, and whether that's part of this too.
Yeah, it's a great read. That's a great read.
Okay, so that was one thing you said that was just really nice, the language. And
so then, go ahead.
Your turn.
Oh, so I was going to say, sorry. To get back to the peoplehood concept, there's a moment later on in Mem Vav, chapter 46.
Okay.
There's a verse 3, verse Gimel, pasuk Gimel. Vayomer Anochi Ha'el Elohei Avicha Al Tira Merda Mitzrayma Ki L'Goy Gadol Asimecha Sham. And Sforno, who's a classical commentary, comments on this verse.
First of all, let's translate that verse, first of all.
Oh, sure. And so this is so to set the stage, right? God is speaking to Jacob before Jacob's on the fence about leaving, or he's like, he's nervous about leaving home to go to Egypt. And God says to him, don't worry. I'm the God who told your father to stay, and I'm telling you it's cool to go. Right. And it's good to go because I will make a great nation out of you there in Egypt. That's the translation of the pasuk.
A reiteration of the promise. It's a link back to the promises made to Avraham that this whole Egypt thing would happen. It's one of those moments that links together various bits and pieces that we've had before.
Exactly. And remember, I'm tying this into the concept of the shift from familial to peoplehood. And L'Goy Gadol Asimcha is peoplehood, a great nation, right? This is the moment, I think, and obviously there's going to be some, especially in the leadership of such an experience, there's going to be some trepidation, there's going to be some fear, and so God is clearly saying, "It's all good, I got you." And Sforno has a comment that he says, it's. I don't remember the exact wording, so forgive me, it's a paraphrase, but basically the need to go into exile to become a great nation is written into this verse, because if he was in Canaan, and putting aside the modern understanding of what I'm about to say for a minute, because it is a little offensive to conceptually to me as the modern mind.
Sure.
If they were to stay in Canaan, they would marry Canaanites, and therefore we would lose the concept of Jewish people. That was the fear that Sforno had for Jacob staying. And that's what the comment is wrapped up in. So to go to Egypt, to get out of the comfort zone, forces the people who are experiencing the shift from comfort to discomfort, and again, Jacob is fearful here, so there's clearly discomfort, forces them to come together to coalesce in a more unified identity.
Well, being a stranger forces that, being an immigrant. You can connect it to what we see with immigrant populations in our own neighborhoods. I live in an immigrant neighborhood right now. I am surrounded by Ethiopians, where the children are the first generation born in this country, where the parents are the ones who emigrated. And right now, if you're Ethiopian and you're living on the East Coast, there's a high probability you've decided to settle in Silver Spring or Washington, D.C., because you're a stranger everywhere else. Even though you speak English, Ethiopians tend to come here speaking English. Even with the language and other stuff, they're gathering as a community. At least this first generation, that community is it's to its advantage to stick together in a way that they wouldn't necessarily need to, or they won't need to the more they assimilate into the local culture in the future.
Exactly. But the goal is to both allow for the assimilation and the experience of the greater culture around them, while keeping your foot or some piece of you connected to the old world. And the old world being your family, your community, whatever it is that you're coming from. It's the college experience 101. And that's one of the roles that Hillel serves, I think, in a really fascinating way. My goal as a Hillel director and for my students is to allow them to utilize the resources that I have, to give them both in learning and education, but also monetarily and fundraising and things like that, to create the Jewish community of their dreams that interacts with the greater community in ways that may have never been done before. I want to be the innovator of future Jewish community, so that these students, who are the current leadership of the Jewish community on campus and probably in their community at home as well, can really test and experiment and figure out the right way for them to express their Jewish identity.
Sforno, in some ways, lived that. Sforno is Sforno's life is that he grows up. He's Italian. He essentially grows up a provincial Jew.
Yep.
In an agrarian community, but eventually his scholarship leads him to the big city. Essentially, to the city, to being in a much more cosmopolitan place, and he becomes a Jewish expert for parts of the church, for legal scholars, etc. So when Sforno talks about how moving to Egypt strengthens their ability to be a nation, or when he implies that that's the case, that may be something he's taking from his own life experience, the same life experience you're talking about from the campus. That that getting out of your comfort zone into a cosmopolitan place, and there's nothing more cosmopolitan than a campus in a lot of ways. You're forced to deal with each other if you're gonna have a life. You're forced to deal with all the diversity around you. Can serve to strengthen you in a lot of ways. Both from internally and externally, which is what you said already.
True, and certain it is. Yeah, that's a great connection. I forgot about that. That's beautiful.
I have often found that Sforno, more than many others, really you can see his life in his commentary a lot of the time. And like almost every time, many times when I've turned to Sforno, knowing his biography just enhances what he's saying, that he really pulled from his real life when he was writing about Torah. And I think he was trying to look for, he's one of the ones who often looks for practical lessons in the Torah. As you just pointed out, this is one of his practical lessons, and a good lesson for, Jews who are living anywhere outside of a sovereign land of Israel, sovereign state of Israel, have to deal with this stuff.
Right.
And Sforno's message is, this is good. We shouldn't be scared of these things.
He's the proto-pluralist.
He really is.
He really is, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have a question for you that's actually similar to a question that I asked last week.
Please.
And because it was also related to this, going down to Egypt. So you've given an answer. You've given an answer for how the Egypt experience was a strengthening experience. Do you think, though, that the pain aspect of it was essential? That's something that that's important to recognize, and the Torah in some ways glosses over it. The Torah spends less than a chapter on the pain of being slaves in Egypt. It barely talks about, it mentions it every now and then, you were slaves in Egypt, for example.
Right.
What was the exile from Canaan, leaving Canaan, living as a community somewhere else. I think Sforno and you have made a good argument where that serves to strengthen us as a nation. Did we have to go through mutual pain, though, as well, in order for that to happen, do you think? Because this is the beginning of a very painful period. Once Yosef and Yaakov die, it's just a generation later that the pain begins. Go ahead.
I think my knee-jerk reaction is it's more a reflection of experience than it is the focal point of the narrative. The change is painful, not necessarily only physically. It can be emotionally painful. The shift, and that's one of the reasons I believe this is the beginning of the end, if you will, of the tribal/familial experience. And that hurts, man. Like leaving your family, leaving your home to go experience cosmopolitan world, the cosmopolitan experience of college and university, that hurts. It's painful. There's homesickness.
Yeah.
You need to kind of rebuild. You lose your doctor, you lose your barber, you have to rebuild your daily life, everything that you knew and was easy. I mean, a lot of students will go home and see their doctor every 6, whatever it is. But the point of, you're breaking away from comfort and that hurts. And I think that the fact that the Torah only spends a handful of psukim on it is speaking to, this is just life. There's pain involved, physical and emotional, but life is bigger than that. And if you bog down in it, I think that can be very negative. And I think that's why we move on to the experience and we focus on the experience of making meaning and experiencing the world in meaningful ways, i.e. Exodus, Sinai, the ritual of, and I think I mentioned to you in speaking about this beforehand, Leviticus, the Levitical material. It's not even just the book of Vayikra. The Levitical material, which is like the third or half of Exodus through Leviticus into half of Bamidbar, half of Numbers, is to me my favorite part of the narrative, because the goal is to create the rituals to hold on to the meaning and to remember and to be stoked by the meaning every day. And that, to me, is clearly the focal point of the narrative. This lachrymose understanding of history that we Jews love to take and play with, that, to me, is actually not only detrimental, I think it can be very troublesome from a theological perspective, for sure, but also from an emotionally healthy perspective. Yeah. And we see, just to digress for a hot minute, one of my teachers, Arthur Green, believes that the Holocaust was so, and obviously many people do this, the Chiddush isn't this part, the Holocaust was so pervasive that we're going to feel this theologically and emotionally as a people for many, 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 many years. And it's one of the reasons why we react so strongly both to the threat, to the state of Israel being threatened, and to people who deny the Holocaust. These are two very emotional responses Jewish communities have. And anti-Semitism as well, that's going to reverberate for generations and generations. But it can't be the focal point. And for a period of time, it was the focal point. And I think we're seeing the fallout from that. There are certain people who perceive that one of the movements is dying. There are certain negative effects happening in the Jewish community writ large that you can see trends based on Pew survey and this and that and the other thing. And I would argue that might be directly a relation, it correlated at least to the experience of the negativity and the focus on it for a period of time. So, and I think that's the point of the Torah. The negative, the pain will always be there, but it cannot be the main experience of Egypt. Right? Joseph was there positively for a period of time. Jacob and family was there positively for a period of time. And then hurt happens, and then we leave. Yeah. So the change, the shift, leads us to this wonderful relationship with God and with ourselves, and eventually with the greater world. And I love that the 5 books stops before we get to the land.
Yeah.
I know we're far afield from VaYigash, so forgive me for taking us everywhere. But I love that both the hero of the shift, the hero of the transition, Moses, doesn't make it into the homeland. And I love that the narrative of the Torah ends before we get into the land and conquer the land, because I believe the point of the authors was to create the peoplehood identity, that I can be Jewish and part of the Jewish people in New Jersey, in Maryland, in California, in India, in Mumbai, in China, in Africa, wherever. Geography is meaningless on some level because we have prayers, we have rituals, we have concepts, we have experience, a shared history that means the world to the peoplehood.
And it all begins right here this week with this Parsha.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, on that note, I'd like to thank Jeremy. Thank you for joining me this week.
Absolutely my pleasure. I really loved it.
Have a Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, you too.
I'd like to once again thank Rabbi Fierstien for joining me on the ParshaCast this week. You can learn everything you want to know about the University of Maryland, Baltimore County Hillel at umbchillel.org. That's umbchillel.org. That's it for this week's show. Remember that there's new ParshaCast content 3 times a week. In addition to my special guests on Thursdays, you can join me for shorter episodes on Bonus Fridays and Midrash Mondays. Please visit ParshaCast.com to view or listen to new episodes, to sign up for the ParshaCast mailing list, or to become a patron. Thanks for joining me, and Shabbat Shalom.